Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora koutou e te whānau. Ko Stephanie Honey tōku ingoa, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this breakout session on digital transformation in international affairs. Now, I know you will have been waiting for this session all day, so it's fantastic to have you here. And I'd like to start by, of course, acknowledging and thanking all our sponsors and giving a particularly warm shout out to the next generation of international thinkers that we have in the room today, the university students here that have been sponsored by the Capes. You're very welcome, and in fact, probably you're the only people in the room who will understand a lot of what's going to be talked about, so you're particularly invited to ask tricky questions of our fantastic panel we have for you today. Now, you will have heard so far today a rich array of topics ranging from defence and security to Indo-Pacific competition to public diplomacy to international trade. But I'd warrant there are very few of those areas or any others in today's troubled world that are not increasingly being transformed by digital technologies. Digital is everywhere. Now, I'm a former trade negotiator, so I love to talk about the digitalisation of the way we produce and consume, do business and trade and send money across borders. But as our illustrious panel is going to discuss, we're also seeing transformation in diplomacy, in law, in security, in politics, in the way money, or is it really money? I don't know, Janine will explain that to us, goes across borders. But even the very fabric of social interactions, the way we engage with the world, the way we see ourselves, our very rights as human beings. Online extremism and polarisation and cybercrime are major challenges. Social media is at best a mixed blessing. I mean, who here, excluding the young people, hasn't shouted at their kids to get off YouTube or Discord? AI is another mixed blessing. It's amazing, unless it's making things up, cheating at exams or murdering its creators. On the other hand, digital disruption also offers huge potential for inclusion and prosperity, for greater economic integration, and it can even help to solve some of those terrible existential challenges we face today, like climate change. And at a more practical level, how would we all have got through the last 3 years without Zoom and Netflix and online shopping? But at the same time, and I think we've heard a little bit about this today, including in the preceding session, we're seeing increasing fragmentation in the digital economy and the very internet itself. Now, the internet has always been a network of networks. It's not a monolith, but there are some very worrying signs that it's fast becoming the splinternet. There's a veritable noodle bowl, a digital noodle bowl of divergent policies and regulations governing digital trade. And big economies are dusting off long-shelved playbooks of industrial subsidies in an attempt to create global dominance in semiconductors, AI, robotics, quantum computing, and a host of other emerging technologies, or if not global dominance, at least self-sufficiency. Now, these trends may be understandable in the context of what we've heard about today, but they also increase the risks and diminish the benefits of digital transformation. So it's an incredibly rich and interesting subject that we have before us in this breakout group. And our speakers today are going to talk about a lot of these issues. So I'm delighted to introduce David Reid, who is the Chief Advisor in the Christchurch Core Unit in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, having taken up that role following a stellar career at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Ministry of Primary Industries. And Janine Grainger, the co-founder and CEO of Easy Crypto, New Zealand's leading cryptocurrency trading platform and a highly regarded voice in the New Zealand fintech sector, driving collaboration between industry, government and the banks. And I would venture to say probably the only person in this room who knows what cryptocurrency is or can talk about blockchain. Now, unfortunately, we were also going to be joined by a third amazing speaker, Linda Jenkinson, but she's unavoidably unable to join us today. Before I throw it over to our great speakers, let me just tell you a little bit about how today's session is going to go. We've shortened down the session because those keynotes went a little longer than planned. And so we're going to have about an hour for this session. We're going to have our two presenters present strictly to time or a little bit more flexibly depending on how they're feeling, probably about 10 minutes each. And then I might kick the discussion part off with a couple of tricky ones for them, but then would really love to hear from all of you. I'm sure the very interesting things they've got to say will provoke a lot of questions, so don't hold back. With that, over to you, David.
Oh, kia ora, thanks for that warm welcome, and greetings everyone. It's really great to be here today, and I should start, as all great conference presentations start, with a few caveats. We all love those, so the opinions I express here are going to be my own, so they don't necessarily reflect the view of DPMC or the government. And they also don't necessarily reflect the views of Bard or ChatGPT or any other large language models, although for those panelists who've had a bit of help, I commend you. You're going to make part of my presentation a little bit easier to make. And I suppose I should also say, regrettably, our special envoy is at large at present, so you're stuck with me, so apologies for that. If it's any consolation, I'm told I cannot disconfirm that the other panelist may or may not be Satoshi Nakamoto. I'll leave that to her to address that question. And I wanted to start with a couple of observations. I think Stephanie's kind of alluded to this, and it's perhaps glib to talk about how ubiquitous digital is. But I think one of the impacts of that is that digital spaces are no longer discretionary spaces. We have no choice to be in them. They're a ubiquitous part of our lives, and they've assumed a central role in how we communicate, how we access information, experience democracy, engage in commerce, internationally and domestically, do science, and develop as nations. And if you want to think about that at a sort of microcosm personal level, just think about what percentage of the transactions you conduct, social, economic, or otherwise, are done on electronic media. And it will give you a sense, multiplied across whole society, what that looks like. So it's often tempting to think about how we might disconnect or go back to simpler times, but complex times are upon us, and digital is part of that mix. There are new powerful examples of artificial intelligence that have sparked both excitement and concern, but AI broadly isn't new, and it's already serving as a fundamental layer of the digital services that we use. It organizes and curates all the information that we see online, and its role is growing. And we might soon imagine it almost as an additional or intermediary functional layer of the world, the digital universe that we inhabit. So watching that development, I think, is really important. And as practitioners in international affairs, we should be very concerned with how we shape those environments to respond to our values and needs as a society. Digital environments have largely been built on open protocols and a global framework that allows New Zealand to be a part of them, to contribute to their development. But that isn't automatically going to remain the case. And people are already worried about fragmented regulatory environments and private walled gardens. So how do we put this in a diplomatic context? And diplomats love historical analogies, so I might offer a couple of them. If you think back, 100 or 150 years ago to a diplomat that was deeply concerned as a kind of abiding and perpetual national interest of keeping sea lanes open. This was how they accessed critical resources, food, money, and information. And it all relied on a single kind of global infrastructure. And this is really the modern equivalent of it. It's the modern sea lane. And New Zealand, as an isolated and connected economy, is heavily connected to that sort of concept. To use another analogy, consider historically how the arrival of written languages impacted on cultures with oral traditions. And it might influence how you think about preserving the distinctive humanness of language, nuance, and culture in an age of AI poses challenges for all of us. When it comes to AI and digital technology, we have to think about how we empower and not degrade democracy and the liberal, open, democratic societies that we've built, and how we avoid getting stuck between a geopolitical or Westphalian rock and a technological hard place. The technologies come with immense benefits, as is much discussed. We've seen it can democratize access to learning, it can develop new medicines, it can write code, and it can even help you examine your human biases. It can look at your written work or your panel presentation from different perspectives and tell you what you've missed. And these are all fantastic things that are going to be enormously enabling for society into the future. They also have national security applications that will excite some people in the room and scare many others. Many of them can be reasonably described as dual-use products, and they give rise to all kinds of asymmetric threats and threat vectors. So many commentators are comparing this sort of AI revolution with the dawn of the nuclear age, but I think there are important differences, and chief among those is the central role that the private sector plays in developing and commercializing this technology. So at the risk of oversimplifying the narrative, I think there is a discussion about an emergent contest between authoritarian and liberal models for deploying digital technology. It's relatively clear what the authoritarian model is. It's relatively well defined. It's one in which only states and their proxies define how technology is used and by whom and when. And then broadly, liberal democracies, I think, have a shared interest in empowering citizens and communities to promote the responsible deployment of the technology, but leaving open that its general purpose in nature. You can't necessarily control or oversee every possible end use. And that managing that dynamic is where multi-stakeholderism comes into the picture. Multi-stakeholderism is a fancy word, but essentially it's about harnessing the capabilities and tensions when you bring sectors together. It's much used in the internet governance community, where you see genuine co-design of systems involving non-state actors. But it actually has a glorious history elsewhere in diplomacy. This week, New Zealand hopes to have Dr. John Barker elected as the next Director General of the Organisation Internationale de la Vigne et du Vin, which is a multi-sector technical organization that sets wine standards and plays an important role in wine trade. And they've embraced the idea of multi-stakeholderism and the way they construct that organization. Peace-building practitioners will know that focusing at a grassroots level and involving communities is one of the most important things you can do to build enduring solutions. Fisheries negotiators will understand this, and a whole range of other disciplines where multi-stakeholderism plays a role. Broadly speaking, if you want to know how something works, what impacts it has on different kinds of people, and how to develop solutions that are durable, you need to broaden the conversation. In some ways, the Christchurch call is a microcosm of the issues of digital diplomacy. So I will talk about that for a moment. It's my area of expertise. I have to humbly acknowledge there are a lot of people in this room who could speak on this topic. And so I can speak to this one experience, and hopefully in the conversation we can augment that a little bit. As all of you know, March 15, 2019 was one of New Zealand's darkest days, and I want to particularly acknowledge the personal impact it had on so many people, particularly the Shuhada, the survivors, the families, and the Muslim community of Christchurch. And it was also a turning point for the internet, because a terrorist steeped in online conspiracies committed mass murder and worked with a network of online extremists to amplify that all across the internet. Technology was not up to the task of stopping him. And to give you a sense of the scale, 1.5 million copies of his live stream were removed from Facebook in 24 hours after the attack. YouTube saw an average of 1 upload attempt per second in the first 48. The systems that were in place were not capable of dealing with this question, and in part because they were compartmentalized within individual corporate and government structures. Terrorism is about coercion, and so our response needs to be calibrated to that. A manifesto promoting hatred and division needed to be met with a message of inclusion and belonging, about our identity as a nation that embraces people. With the internet being weaponized, we had to find a way to embrace the things that we value about the internet, as a place where human rights can be realized, as a force for good in the world, as a free and open infrastructure that promotes human development. And that was the basis on which New Zealand and France, with help from many others, assembled the Christchurch call. So in the weeks following March 15th, New Zealand engaged in a number of international conversations about what a viable solution to this would look like. And I want to particularly acknowledge the role that France played as the G7 chair in that year, and stepping up to the plate and being a solid partner for New Zealand through that negotiation. And to the many others who were involved in that origin story. Ambassador Harris, I think, is in the room, and Deputy Secretary Hallam play an important role in all of this. I'm not going to go into great depth about the Christchurch call and what it is, because I think we have some other issues that people are interested in discussing here. But broadly, it's based around 25 commitments that are made by both governments and the tech sector, and they're to be delivered in a multi-stakeholder way in partnership with civil society, while upholding human rights and a free, open, secure internet. It's unique in that it's led by heads of state and government, by top executives from the technology sector and non-governmental organizations. And at our leaders' summits, they all sit together and have proper open-ended conversations about what is necessary to be done, what's possible to do, how to resource it, and then providing instructions to our working groups to carry those out. And that helps us to build on the consensus that we need to deliver on some very hard things. The call's achievements have been significant. It's materially changed the way the tech sector operates. It's created new operational protocols and shared technology capabilities. And it's maneuvered effectively around many issues that have vexed the multilateral system, helped to prevent violent extremists from freely manipulating the information environment, and created the space for communities impacted by terrorism to have a say in how responses are designed and implemented. Final point on the call. Last year, New Zealand, the United States, Twitter, Microsoft, and a nonprofit called OpenMind announced the Christchurch Call Initiative on Algorithmic Outcomes. This is a project to better understand the human impacts of technology. It uses privacy-enhancing technologies to enable researchers, external researchers, to ask questions about how algorithms work, to access data that is held privately. And it has the potential to transform how we develop, deploy, train, understand, and govern AI in general. It's now been tested and verified across 3 social media platforms, and it's being scaled up as a tool to help the community do its work. Not just to address the presenting issue of terrorist content, but to understand how it is that people become radicalized online and how we prevent a new generation of people from becoming terrorists that engage in this kind of activity. So the call, and Vangelis will forgive me if he's listening, it's a great example of curated, concerted, plurilateral multi-stakeholderism. It should not be the only one. New Zealand is a globally connected, technologically sophisticated democracy. We have an inherent interest in shaping our international environment, and digital technologies are a central part of that. It's not a world in which we can happily live with someone else's rulebook. We need to carve out the space for our communities and values to be reflected there. So how can we do that? Good foreign policy starts at home, so I think effective public policy responses to AI are important. We need to support the deployment of technology to increase social well-being. There are numerous examples of how it might streamline, make public services more accessible and responsive. We also need to build more digital experts. Just as we've done over the years with trade policy, we hired diverse, clever people like Stephanie, and we sent them to the WTO to cut their teeth. We need to have people honing their craft at the UN Internet Governance Forum, at ICANN, at the Internet Engineering Task Force, and at new convenings like the Global Partnership on AI and the Tech for Democracy Forum. And we need to build coalitions. We can start with existing like-minded groupings like the Freedom Online Coalition. And for trade policy people here, I like to call it the Cairns Group of the Internet. And we'll need to work with groups like the FOC to understand what's going on in a crowded space, to enlist help from others when it's required, and to work together, because New Zealand works best when we work in coalitions. And we need to work in those coalitions to discourage fragmentation, find common ground. There's a lot of open space for this, and we can go into this in the Q&A. But there's almost certainly a role for international technical standards, standards bodies that might help define how we manage the risks that arise from AI as well as the benefits. They should be multi-stakeholder, and we should be finding ways that we can reflect our values through them at a local level, but also cooperate globally to make sure that this remains an open, free infrastructure that's available freely to everyone. We should think about how oversight mechanisms and human rights benchmarks are developed and what scope there is for us to participate in shaping them, and more importantly, in creating space for our own civil society, including tangata whenua, to do so. So I'm going to leave it there, but I think we've got a lovely basis for a continuing conversation.
All right. Ahi Marie, ko Janine Grainger tokunga, ko o te kai whakahaere o Easy Crypto. Thank you all for having me along today. And I'm here to talk about, well, the theme of our conference is solutions, which I really love. And so this is a great one for me to chat to in terms of blockchain being my background, because blockchain is full of solutions for the international sphere. There's solutions in terms of voting, healthcare, record keeping, supply chain logistics, a whole range of things. But the one I'm going to focus on today is around solutions in international finance. And I'm going to give you an overview of the challenges, opportunities, and solutions that blockchain can bring in 3 different areas. So firstly, looking at monetary sovereignty, secondly, financial crime, and thirdly, around regulation. But before I get into that, as Stephanie alluded to, probably everyone in this room apart from me, I think, is sitting there going, you know, blockchain, crypto, eyes glassed over. If there are any experts, please jump in and join us up here. But otherwise, I thought I would start with a quick 101 on what blockchain and cryptocurrencies are to give everyone a little bit of comfort that it's not this big, mystical, unknown area. It's actually pretty straightforward, a lot of it. So firstly, blockchain is really simply just a ledger. It's a way of storing data. You can think of it like a spreadsheet. But what makes blockchain a bit different from traditional data storage and spreadsheets is that it is decentralized. So it can be contributed to by anyone, anywhere in the world, but it is trustworthy. Any data that is put on it has been checked and validated, and once data is put into that ledger, it can't be altered. So it gives us a trustworthy, not corruptible, democratic or decentralized way to store data. So nothing that special, right? And the first use case that we saw of blockchain was cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency, again, not that, mythical, it's really just a way to exchange value. And that value can be all sorts of things. But the first version of exchanging value that we saw was Bitcoin. And that lets people exchange Bitcoin between any 2 people, anywhere in the world, without intermediaries, and in a way that is really trusted. And when people think about Bitcoin, most people think about the crazy fluctuations, massive volatility. The prices can change 20% in a day, 10% in a few minutes. And this is not a very practical way to actually exchange value. If you're a restaurant, you can't have your menus change in price that quickly. No one really wants to get paid except for a few very fringe anarchists in something that's that volatile. And so this wasn't a very, while it was a great way to prove the technology and prove that this could be done, it wasn't very fit for purpose for payments. But what we've had instead is something called stable coins. Just out of interest, has anyone here heard of stable coins before? Okay, I've got maybe half a dozen hands. So this is not something that's very well known, but it's a way that cryptocurrency and blockchain has been moving into more practical real-world use cases. So stable coins, they solve for value transfer by pegging themselves. So it's a digital product, but it's pegged to an underlying asset, and often the US dollar. So typically the peg is achieved through holding real world assets, so actual dollars in a bank account, and then the crypto asset, the stable coin, is a digital representation of that. And this brings a lot of benefits. So at Easy Crypto, we hire staff in around 7 different countries, and I pay a lot of them through stable coins. So if one of my staff earns $1,000 a month, I'll send them $1,000 stable coin. They'll receive it within seconds, and they'll receive exactly $1,000. There's no intermediaries, no sort of percentages lost to currency conversion or middlemen. It just goes straight through from me to them in almost real time. So that's got, a lot of benefits, obviously. And also with digital money, we can program it. And I would love to dig into this. I could do an entire topic on what this looks like. I'll probably touch on a few very small examples, but there's a huge amount of power in programmable money and what we can do with money if we can make it do what we want when certain conditions are met based on XYZ being achieved, the money does this or that. So looking at these, we've got these digital equivalents of traditional currencies, but they're not controlled by central governments. And that brings us on to our first point around monetary sovereignty. So a core part of statehood, or one of the ones, my background's in economics, so the core part that I'm familiar with is around monetary sovereignty, control over currency and in economic conditions. And governments can exercise monetary sovereignty through policy tools such as the OCR, which we see a lot of in the news all the time, quantitative easing, and other techniques. So the challenge here that cryptocurrency or blockchain brings is that with decentralized finance, so DeFi as we call it in my industry, that is finance which is peer-to-peer. It sits outside of the control of banks and governments, and this is a really thriving industry. So you've got DeFi pools for things like lending. I can deposit some of my money into a DeFi pool. Someone can borrow against it. I have full protection. And again, coming back to programmable money, maybe the person who's borrowing has put in Bitcoin as collateral. They don't want to sell their Bitcoin. They believe it might go up in value, but they want $1,000 to buy a car. So they put their Bitcoin into the pool. Their Bitcoin's held as collateral. My money gets lent to them. If for any reason Bitcoin declines in value, that it's not going to hold as collateral anymore, the smart contract will automatically sell their funds, repaying my loan. So there's no risk to me as a lender. And this stuff is happening all the time. People are having mortgages on through DeFi pools. There's a lot of borrowing and lending, lots of microloans going on. And all of this sits outside of the pool of influence for OCRs and for government policy. And so you've got these assets that sit in the digital realm, which are outside of control of sovereign states. But obviously where there's challenge, there's opportunity as well. And the opportunity here, I think a really big one, is around central bank digital currencies. So this is a term that if you haven't heard, I'm sure you will more over the coming years. CBDCs, I have to say with crypto, we seem to like these really long convoluted terms. NFTs, non-fungible tokens, like we could just say unique assets, but no, NFTs and CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. So these are ways for governments to issue their own digital token. So you've got your fiat currency, which is currently issued in two forms: cash or direct to banks, and then banks can use that in a pseudo-digital way with customers. For a central bank digital currency, our government could issue money directly to us as citizens, and we could directly hold government-issued funds. It could enable things like more efficient tax collection. Again, with programmable money, imagine if you were a merchant, a small business owner, and every time a customer bought something point of sale at your store, you could set aside 15% through an automatic GST remittance that goes to pay your tax bill with the IRD so that you don't have to worry about end of period remittances. It can also give more insight into where currencies are being used. The government could see in real time how money is moving and flowing around different sectors of the economy. And we could have direct delivery of benefits into citizen wallets with, again, programmatic controls. So there is a lot of opportunities there, a lot of solutions that I think the space can bring. And I genuinely believe, as David was talking about before, we've seen this massive digitization of information, of communication channels, of how we connect. And I think we'll see an increasing digitization of finance, and there's a real opportunity here for governments to be involved, to leverage the solutions that are possible in this space. And a lot of that will come down to policy and regulatory settings and innovation from governments and from reserve banks. So talking about all of this digital money and money moving around online, I imagine everyone's sort of thinking of the big elephant in the room here possibly being cybercrime and money laundering, which is what most people think about when they hear about crypto. It'll be either money laundering or environmental damage. And sadly, I won't talk to the environmental damage today. That's probably in the other stream, but I could. But we'll talk about cybercrime and cryptocurrency being used for crime. So again, let's start with a challenge here. Crypto is great for criminals. It is globally available, easy to move, instantaneous, very low cost, and once a transaction has been made, it's irreversible. So that sounds pretty problematic, right? And yet, less than 0.2% of cryptocurrency activity is associated with crime, and less than 1% of all global illicit money flows happen using cryptocurrency. So if crypto is so good for crime, why aren't these figures higher? Well, the truth is that crypto is terrible for crime. If you were conducting financial crime, would you want to move your money on a method that is transparent and fully visible to law enforcement and regulators? Probably not. The thing is that blockchains, by their very nature, are publicly available, they're transparent, and they're traceable. And increasingly, cryptocurrency companies like mine are being regulated for things like AML requirements to do KYC and conduct as good financial market citizens. So this is a really big misunderstanding about crypto, is that it's good for crime. I think the misunderstanding started around the time of the Silk Road, and with many things, criminals are often the first to target onto new innovations and see the potential of new technology. So with Silk Road, you had people wanting to buy and sell drugs online, and they realized, hey, this was a borderless, instant, nearly free way of sending money. Well, that's a pretty good thing. And they could get away with crime in those days because no one was looking. Nowadays, however, there are whole industries built around blockchain analytics in terms of tracing and understanding what's happening on chain, and there's a huge amount of insight and information available. So as those tools increase in prevalence and in the technology that we have available for us, and AI will be making big strides in this space as well, the ability to get away with crime on the blockchain will be reducing more and more. And again, if I had more time, I could talk to you about a live example we have of this. We had a customer who was phished for a large amount of money. We managed to trace that on the blockchain. We've had those assets frozen by different exchanges around the world, and we're just going through the process of repatriating those funds back to the customer at the moment. So this stuff can and does happen. And if there is a key message here, I think it's that crime is probably, blockchain's not where you want to go for financial crime. The traditional financial system is a better and easier place for that. So that brings me on to my last point, which is around regulation. And this is definitely a big challenge. This space is moving so fast, and it can be challenging for regulation to adapt quickly enough to what is happening. But with the challenges, again, opportunities. And I think there is a massive opportunity for New Zealand Inc. to set itself up as a home for innovation in the digital sphere, particularly when it comes to fintech. So in many countries around the world, the regulation as it pertains to blockchain, Web3, cryptocurrency is very vague, or it's not fit for purpose. It's sort of anchored back in legacy systems, or it's just not clear. And we're seeing the SEC at the moment coming up against a couple of big lawsuits with crypto firms in the US. Some of that is warranted. Some of it is a lack of, insight from regulators when it's been asked for, and what we call regulation by enforcement, which no one wants to have to deal with. So setting up clear and principles-based regulation, and particularly in a country like New Zealand that has one layer of government, could position us as a really successful place to attract innovation and talent and build economic development for NZ Inc. And a few of the practical solutions that we could look at in the regulatory space are things like regulatory sandboxes. So Singapore's been doing this for a long time with good success, enabling a place for innovators to test and learn without the fear of that regulation by enforcement, and similarly allowing policymakers to see the impact of different policy settings before they're enshrined in law. Another thing that we could look at doing, and New South Wales has recently started with some of this, is machine-readable legislation. So having legislation that is so clear that it can be read by a smart contract or by AI, and that can be coded in and easily implemented. And that's a trend that I think we'll definitely see more of, and somewhere that, again, New Zealand with our small size and our ease of government access could be a leader on. So with those three examples of monetary sovereignty, financial crime and regulation, I hope I've given you a little bit of insight as to how digitisation of finance is changing international affairs, and also what's coming down the pipeline, not just in terms of challenges, but more importantly, the opportunities and some of the solutions that we can start to build towards. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much to both of you. I mean, two very different but equally fascinating sort of thought starters for our discussion today. And I am shortly going to put it out to you in the audience for the many questions I'm sure you have burning in your minds right now. But let me get the juices flowing with a tricky one for you, David. It was very interesting to hear you talk about essentially, the curated, concerted, plurilateral, multi-stakeholderism. Got to put that into my my lexicon from now on. But of course, that sounds nice. But what do we do about the sort of existential risks? Is that really a solution? And 900 signatories recently produced a letter, including major tech company CEOs and AI scientists, in which they said mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics and nuclear war. I mean, that's pretty sobering stuff. So what should we be doing about that? Is this multi-stakeholderism the answer? Is there more we can be doing ourselves? Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. And I should start just by addressing the letter, because the statement, it was signed by executives at Anthropic, at OpenAI, and at Google DeepMind. So these are the leading people developing and commercializing these technologies, telling us they're deeply worried about the fact that it might kill us. And at some level, that's horrible and deeply disempowering and kind of cynical, right? Because, why would you hype up the destructive potential of the thing that you're putting on the market? And at a certain other level, I kind of understand it, because what they're articulating there is that there is a risk that they're deeply worried about, and they're not sure that they can solve it by themselves. I think within that, we've seen interesting examples of people articulating what approaches to this might look like. Sam Altman's testimony at the Congress was an interesting example. If you look at the risk-based approaches that the European Union takes in its Digital Services Act, its Draft AI Act, or indeed the White House's blueprint on AI safety. But one thing that's central to all of those is this idea of safe and effective systems deployment. And what it means is that you need to kind of red team, you need to test out the potential of these tools before you deploy them widely. And in order to do that, you need to engage with lots of different kinds of people. If you only do red teaming and testing of a tool like this with Caucasian, middle-class, East Coast dwelling people, then you're going to get huge problems with algorithmic bias. And so, the most effective approaches to that are going to be multi-stakeholder, and they're going to involve individuals and communities. I think it's really bad to talk about AI as a sort of abstract, anthropomorphized super entity. I mean, it is still a product. It's contained within, within the bounds of the products that it's deployed on. But I also think, we shouldn't just be thinking about this existential risk. There's actually a whole lot of lower order risks that we should be deeply concerned about that people are already seeing. Things like the risk that, through systematic disinformation, the dehumanization of particular kinds of people, that it leads to violence. That's something that we've seen. That's a thing that the Christchurch Call grapples with. And Assistant Secretary Kittenbrink spoke to this when he talked about the Global Partnership for Action on Online Gender-Based Harassment and Abuse. There is a link between the curation of content and human behavior, and it's not an easy one to draw. But in order to have effective solutions to that, we need to work with the tech industry. We actually need to be at the back end of these products to understand how they work and how they respond to different things. Doing that ethically and safely requires things like the Christchurch Call Initiative on Algorithmic Outcomes, requires proper safety protocols and proper collaborations.
And I would venture to say as well, as you made the point in your remarks, of course, we need the officials who are trying to do this important work to be gripped up on what the technology actually does, which I guess is a whole nother tricky issue. Look, let's bring it to a little bit more of a sort of practical reality. And Janine, I was very struck by your, thank you for bringing some solutions to the table after we're all now thoroughly depressed by David. You talked about the potential for New Zealand to be a kind of incubator or innovation lab for fintech and these sort of more creative technology solutions. But, how do we actually attract the talent and the capital to New Zealand? Because obviously, we want to do that, but so do lots of other people. So what's the secret sauce there?
Well, I think New Zealand already has a lot going for it in this space, particularly when you're talking to the tech audience. Most of them dream of moving to New Zealand, and over COVID we saw a huge spike in search results from Silicon Valley and other places of how to move here. So we've got a lot going in terms of natural attraction, and what we need to back that up with is the right settings in the regulatory environment, I think, would be the biggest one. It's great that we've got fibre, it's great that we've got cool cities, but if the regulation doesn't support companies like mine to set up, to know that they're operating within the bounds of the law, to have ability to engage with regulators and understand where the law is not clear, because there will be a lot of areas. Without that, we're on hiding to nothing. So regulatory clarity, I think a joined up approach from government. A lot of government agencies are doing great things in this space, but having a whole of government focus on it and a whole of government approach to welcoming and engaging with the sector, setting up things like regulatory sandboxes, that would go a huge way.
Great. Well, I'm sure all the officials in the room have taken a careful note on that. But now it's your turn. There are so many questions. I have many more if nobody else wants to have a go. But please put some tricky ones to our customers panel. And we have a lady in the pink jacket there. If you wouldn't mind just quickly saying who you are and then shout out your question. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sian. I'm a student at the University of Auckland, and at the moment I'm looking into cyber sanctions for a paper that I'm writing, and kind of looking at how certain governments are using sanctions to respond to cyber activity. Do you know if that's something that we might consider in New Zealand, given that Australia's recently done that? Or if perhaps in your personal opinions you think it's the right approach to be taking?
Sounds like one for you, David.
Yeah, I should caveat this further by saying, when I said we needed to build more digital experts, I included myself. I'm not personally in the cyber field, so I should probably leave that to the people that know more about it. But I think one of the interesting aspects of cyber risk is actually the role of artificial intelligence in it, as both an offensive and a defensive capability, and the kind of worrying equilibriums that might develop between those two systems when they interact. And I think that's another example of the kinds of risks that we need to be thinking about and managing in multi-stakeholder settings. Because cyber risk impacts on individuals, it impacts on human rights activists, it impacts on businesses. Governments alone don't necessarily have the capabilities or all the wisdom to deal with it. So again, concerted, curated, open, plurilateral multi-stakeholderism is probably what we need to do.
Love it.
It should be an acronym.
Yeah.
And of course, if I could just chip in, this isn't just a sort of something that could be confined within national boundaries either, is it? I mean, hackers don't just limit their activities to their own backyard, do they? Great question. Thanks so much. Yep.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm a student at UC here with the Capes. And I think both of you two alluded to the kind of poor public perception that there is of cryptocurrency. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on where that public disconnect stems from and what options are for moving forward and developing fintech, and how we can get the public more on side with that. Because I think a lot of people find it very inaccessible. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So I'd just love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is a big question. Thank you. I mean, long term, like I said in my talk, I think we're going to see increasing digitization of assets, and whether that needs to wear the label cryptocurrency or how that works under the hood. Like, if you think about the internet, we all use it every day, but there's probably no one in this room, maybe one or two, who actually know how it works in terms of the technical protocols, the TCP/IP, all of the under the hood. And I see crypto assets as being, we're very early stage. We're the geeks that are setting up the internet, and we know we've got the dark net. We're know how it all works. But in the future, when it becomes useful to people, they don't care. They don't need to know that. And so being able to move into a world where we're post-crypto and more digitization of assets, and the technology is under the hood, but the use cases are very much what works for people. I think that'll be a big step towards it. And I think my industry has, we've failed to deliver on that so far. We'll cut us some slack because it's still early days, but things like wallets do not solve the user experience that make it easy and safe for people to engage. I mean, I'm a regular crypto user, and I freak out every time I have to send funds through something like MetaMask, and anyone who knows that will be nodding, because it's just you don't know what you're doing and you don't have that security. And crypto wallets need to feel as safe as using your online banking, and we need to wrap better support and systems around to protect against cybercrime, phishing, hacks like that. So I think it's a challenge of misunderstanding, because the industry's had a lot of negative headlines because the media loves negative headlines. So energy use, cybercrime, all of that sort of thing drives good headlines, but also the practical user experience hasn't been built out for a way that makes it accessible for everyday people.
Great, thanks. Yes.
Hi, my name's Taylor Lee. I'm also here with the Capes, and I'm a student at the University of Auckland. I feel like it's really important in conversations about digital transformation to consider how it is quite a privilege to have that digital transformation. And I'm just wondering how New Zealand, as an innovator in this space, what role we have in assisting places such as Latin America, who are quite often not included in these conversations. I wonder how you propose that we can support and assist helping them build up this kind of digital transformation space in international affairs.
Excellent question. It was on my list too, so go ahead, David.
I think we can probably both speak to this one, but I'm happy to have a crack at the question. There's so many dimensions to it, right? Like, digital inclusion includes basic things like the ability to connect and having the devices and the connectivity that allows you to do that. And technology is helping with that, but I think it's actually also just about involving people in solution building. And through the Christchurch call, we've got good experience. We work with Chile, with Brazil, with Colombia, with Peru. We work with actually civil rights and digital rights groups in those countries to talk about the issues that they're facing and involving them in that process. And I think that's also really important. Technology isn't something that you do to people, it's something that empowers people and communities.
Yeah, and I think like in my space, in the financial space, like obviously there's a huge amount of empowerment that comes with access to financial services. And this is one of the things that got me into crypto in the first place, is seeing, you know, the tools and services that we all take for granted here, banking services, wealth management, that sort of thing, are not accessible to a lot of people. And crypto and blockchain does give huge opportunity for that, but it does come with risks as well. And I was reading an interesting PhD dissertation on this just the other week, actually, about seeing blockchain as another tool of colonial, expansion, because you've got a lot of it driven similarly with AI from certain sectors of the world that are not representative of the world as a whole. But I think the more that we can enable the tools to be out there open source, I'm a really big proponent of open access, open source, and you see them take on a life of their own in different places. And Africa, for example, is one of the biggest users of the Lightning Network, which is this particular part of Bitcoin that the rest of the world kind of ignores, but it really suits their needs and it's really useful there. And you see, whole villages and ghettos all sort of covered in Lightning Network protocol banners because they've found it really useful for their life and in doing payments. So I think hopefully enabling people to access the tech and have it open source will let it shine a lot in its own ways. And that's probably where the challenge for AI is, because that is not open source. It's very closed and very tightly controlled.
If I could just add through a bit of a trade lens, I think, I've done quite a bit of work on this myself and for the Asian Development Bank. One of the big problems that a lot of other economies face, whether in Latin America or Southeast Asia or South Asia and Africa, is that they don't actually have the regulatory building blocks that you need. I mean, some of the things that we take for granted about the way we govern these things are just not part of the sort of regulatory landscape. So to pick up on David's point, there's a big job of work that's needed around infrastructure, around technologies, around the regulatory settings. It's a big piece of work. Now, I can see a gentleman down the back there. Just wait, somebody's coming over with a microphone and we'd love to hear from you.
We've also had a question here at the front.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentations. For some of us who really don't understand this, I thought you could, this is for Janine, I thought you could give us just a background on lessons learned on the Bankman-Fried story. What exactly went wrong, and is there any possibility that that could happen here, and how do we safeguard that? By the way, I just wanted to add also, since I'm from Africa, Kenya does very well on this. You now have a person who's up in the hinterlands of Kenya, an old lady who can sell her flowers just sitting on her phone. So technology has helped in some instances. But yes, I'm interested in lessons learned, and because people are nervous about this. I suppose the difference, you made an example of the internet. Not many people are putting money when they use the internet. Here you're putting your money, so people get very worried. So what did we learn, and how can we safeguard that?
That was about Sam Bankman-Fried, is that right? Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good question. And one of the presentations that I often give is around fraud in crypto, because this is something that is very... it's very concerning to me, and particularly in a New Zealand setting, because we don't, as a country, have a strong response to fraud, and it's only going to come at us harder and faster as things digitise more and as people feel, more comfortable engaging online. That's more vulnerabilities for attack. The fraud that we saw with SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, and FTX, though, was nothing actually related to cryptocurrency. It's very similar to the Bernie Madoff fraud. It was a lot of confidence. It was, this was a company, FTX was one of the most regulated crypto companies out there. They had obtained licenses and regulations in multiple jurisdictions around the world. And the challenge isn't necessarily more regulation, although I think there is a little bit around prudential oversight that was missing in this case. They didn't have a proper board of governance, they didn't have proper auditors. That should be 101 for any company dealing with that much money. But I think what's needed, and this is where crypto really can bring solutions, is around transparency. So cryptocurrency, by its nature, again, very transparent, and a lot of crypto businesses are now starting to link that transparency up with audits and attestations to show that the funds that they say they are holding on behalf of their customers do actually exist in wallets, and they can prove that they have those funds. A lot more transparency there than you'd get with a bank, for example, where you'd need to wait for their auditor to publish an audit report once a year. You can get real-time live transparency with crypto. The regulations are needed to be increased, I think, particularly with the prudential side. There was just massive oversight and lack of governance. The other one that really surprised me about that story was the investors going in on that. Like, I think VC investors should be wearing egg on their face for investing so much money into a company that was really just Emperor's new clothes, and they have a lot of trust, and we trust that investors know what they're doing when they're professional VC investors, and they've really fallen short on their due diligence on that. But I think, we're talking about whether the same thing will happen in New Zealand. Like, Easy Crypto is New Zealand's FTX, and we're not an exit scam, I promise. But one of the other key points there, that one of the big differences between my company and many others in the space is that we don't hold customer funds. We never have, and we never will. We were born in the aftermath of Cryptopia. For anyone who remembers, that was the big New Zealand exchange that went down with millions of dollars of customers' funds through a hack. Our industry is still too infant and too young for us to have like the decades of experience and confidence that we have all of the right protections against hacks and cybercrime. The safest way for us to engage with customers is to not build honeypots of people to hack. And so that's one of the things that, I personally believe in, is holding your own assets, being in charge of your own funds. And that is something that crypto enables and is really good for. Great.
It's very interesting, that transparency point. Crypto, not what it says on the tin. That hidden aspect. Yes, and whoever would like to go.
Hi, my name is Poppy. I'm from the University of Auckland, also with the Cape. David, you in particular said in your talk about uses of AI that it could be used for medical advice. And as a health science student, I'll save everyone the fire and brimstone. I think about that. But one thing that worried me, especially with that, is that you can't hold a machine accountable for what it tells you and what you do with it. Because if a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or anyone that is meant to serve you gives you bad advice and bad things happen to you because of it, you can theoretically lay a complaint, you can theoretically get some sort of reparation for that. But I'm seeing increasingly that people are allowing AI to make decisions for them that I don't think you should let AI make for you. But what are your thoughts on making sure that we don't have to needlessly suffer with the decisions that AI might make for us on a large scale?
Yeah, thanks. And public safety message, don't take medical advice from AI, please. I think my remarks, I was referring to an AI that was used in a novel way to identify antibiotic drug targets. So essentially, they'd mapped out an active site, they'd worked out how the protein folds, and previously this had just been computationally too difficult, and they've managed to find a way to identify multiple possible antibiotics that could be developed, and then they've gone through all of the proper testing and protocols that are involved in medical ethics. So that was the example, not go consult Bard to ask it what's wrong with your cough or something like that. That's definitely not something anyone should do. And to the broader accountability point, I think that also goes back to this question about responsible deployment of a tool, and developing that and deploying it in a way that is geared towards public safety and risk management. We shouldn't anthropomorphize these tools. There are people that are responsible for putting them on the market.
And those people are profiting from it, and so they can't just put them out with disclaimers and saying, don't use it for anything. There needs to be, they need to back the tools that they're putting out there and be held accountable if they're being used incorrectly.
We probably have time for a few more questions. I see you, but we might just go to another part of the room just for fairness, and then I'll come back to you if we can. Go ahead.
Kia ora panelists, Janine and David, thank you for your amazing talk. And coming back to my background, I'm studying in AUT, and I have a background in health and environmental sciences, so healthcare, digital health, that's where I'm exactly looking at. And yeah, just as you pointed out, Janine, New Zealand was my choice of destination, and the digital skills and the wider sociological models, they were part of like they actually influenced my decision to move to New Zealand and pursue a career and like actually study academic programs in the space here. So yeah, blockchain is something I was really interested in. I'm an advocate for blockchain, and the funny thing, if you talk about blockchain, it's just all about cryptocurrency, and that's where the negative type comes from. I think that what Emily talked about, like that negative type of blockchain and NFTs. My problem is, I reckon blockchain has a lot of use cases, and talking in an international affairs conference, I think we can actually learn a lot from other digital republics that care about blockchain, like Estonia, for example. I think we were the first country to actually adopt FPOS, and we are quite successful at it. At the same time, we actually do really good at blockchain-based systems. I'm not talking about like crypto. We are doing a lot at it, but then we could do a lot in, for example, like healthcare. That's a use case. And I think it's a pretty apt moment because this emergency management bill was introduced in the parliament yesterday. So I think there's a space where we can actually collaborate with other countries. If diplomats are in the room, if you're listening, I think that's a good space to actually have some collaborations and learn, and basically my career art is what I would say. So my question is, where do you see, like coming from the DPMC, where do you see blockchain when it comes to digital governance going into the future, 10 years from now?
Can we get a special envoy for blockchain?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, like many things, it's taken a while to understand what the possible use cases are that have social benefit, the extent to which the government kind of needs to be involved either to manage the negative consequences or to ensure that there are positive ones. I'm certainly not an expert on it. I think you've identified a few interesting avenues for that, and obviously pointed to the importance of having responsible kind of regulatory systems in place as well as a kind of prerequisite. As I say, I can't speak for my agency and what they want to do in the future, but it's definitely something we should keep our eyes on.
Great, thanks, David. And we might just, in the interest of running out of time, over to you with your question. And then probably for those of you who haven't had a chance yet, we maybe have time for one or two more. So be ready to throw your hands up when the moment comes.
Hi, my name is Santana. I'm a high school student. This is a question for both of you, but I think it applies in different ways. With you talked about how cryptocurrency can be very transparent, especially since you can see how money is moved around. With you talked about like online accountability, especially with the development of the internet. Everyone has a digital footprint, basically. And my question is, how do you see that impacting on privacy?
This is a really good question, and one that I would have loved to cover in my talk, but I don't have enough time, so thank you for giving the opportunity. This is something that I think for any policymakers, regulators, and all of us as individuals in the room, we should be watching really closely and be active in shaping how this works out. Because if you look at finance going digital and going online and being fully traceable, there's a lot of aspects of that we don't necessarily want to be visible to everyone and linked to our identity. Simple example, if you go down to the shop, you buy something at the shop and someone can see, how much you earn, what your mortgage payments are, where you spend most of your money. Like, that is not visibility that we want everyone to have. So blockchain's transparency is a bit of a double-edged sword, because a lot of our financial data we want to keep private. There are a lot of ways that we can achieve that. And also, I guess the other point to note there is, as we move towards one of the other really likely future blockchain, or at least digital use cases, is digital identity. Our identities at the moment are not digitized. Everyone who's ever had to do KYC for anything, and for those of us who are a bit older, it's probably once a week and you're signing up to something or other. It's a real challenge. It's very time consuming. It's a very inefficient system. So identity is likely to be digitized. And as we have digital identity, digital finances, a lot of other digital data, the linkage of those things for not only government surveillance, and there are some countries like China that already have a lot of concerning moves in this space, but also corporate data and sort of surveillance capitalism is very concerning. One of the things that we have in crypto, just to touch very briefly on solutions, is what's called zero knowledge proofs. And this is where I'd like us, to be looking at more ways that we can put out verified data, verified information without disclosing that information. So a really simple example of that is when you go to the supermarket and they ID you, which doesn't happen to me often enough, sadly, I have to show them my ID and they can see my full date of birth. That's actually quite confidential, private information that could be used against me, call up my bank, pretend to be me. So I would prefer not to disclose my date of birth. All I need to disclose to them is that, yes, I am over 18. They don't need to know any other details. So zero knowledge proof is a way of giving someone an attestation that, yes, I'm over 18, without giving them the data such as my birth date that proves that.
And David?
Yeah, KYC is know your customer, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, cool. No, I was thinking that's what it meant. A couple of things. So New Zealand and the EU have kind of comprehensive privacy frameworks that are a very important part of how the dynamics in the sector get managed. And it was good to see when the White House put out their blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, they also included privacy as a kind of central tenet of that, because I think it's really crucial in this area. And one of the challenges that you confront when you are trying to look at how you manage the negative consequences of these tools is actually how you get robust research in a way that doesn't compromise privacy. So the same kind of privacy enhancing technologies that you might be able to use to verify that you are 18 can actually also be used in this space. It's what we're trying to do in the algorithmic project that I mentioned earlier. If you want to know how someone has an online user journey and ends up in a radicalized space, it means you need to know a lot about what an individual's journey online looked like. And you don't necessarily want that information to be made public or released to external researchers, but you need to be able to answer questions about the dynamics of that. And so these cryptographic kind of tools should, in a way, empower external parties to be able to ask questions and get answers to them without compromising that fundamental privacy. And I think that's the thing that's really, really hopeful coming out of this, is a kind of multi-stakeholder technology solution. But the most important thing around that is the ethical framework that you need to build on it, and the external involvement of civil society and other parties to make it work.
Multi-stakeholders, love it. I'm looking at the middle slice down towards the back. Anyone? I see you, chairman of our conference. But I'm going to just ask the lady behind you, and then Dick, you can have the final word. And because we are rather pressed for time, if I could please ask you just to make a quick question and quick answers from our panellists.
Yes, hi, this is Christine Yip. I'm aware that New Zealand government has started on the Open Government Initiative a few years ago, and it just seems like there isn't a lot of momentum from a public and private sector point of view. And we're talking about innovation, and I'm just wondering, is it still on the agenda? Like, what is it? Is it enabling the private sector, our IT sector, to be able to tap on the latest innovation while not being a roadblock?
The 1 minute version, please, David.
Open government's really important. I think, I don't know the details of our involvement in it, but I think we should be doing more of it. I think if tools that train on data sets are the way that people interpret New Zealand and understand things about us, we need to make sure that they're presented with really good, accurate information about our society and the way it's constituted. And so yes, we should do more of it. And some of it we may be able to do using these privacy enhancing tools. Some of it is just open information that we should be releasing and making more readily available. Great, thank you. And the last word to the president of the NZIIA. Could we have a mic over here, please? Thank you.
One very quick and one very easy question for both of you to answer is, given the way this digital transformation is heading, how do you get international jurisdiction enforced?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to struggle with the 1 minute version of this because I think, there was a counterfactual when we built the Christchurch call, which was go out and make a short UN treaty and create enforceable legal constructs that allow you to solve this problem. And I think most of the people that looked at that kind of squinted and understood that that was almost like an impossible task at an international level to achieve that kind of consensus with authoritarian powers and people that use technology as a tool of oppression at the table. Like, it's just very difficult. I think the thing, again, that's most effective is actually having leadership from across the liberal democracies coming together to give a really clear idea of what it is that they need from these systems, and to be able to hold technology companies accountable, but actually vice versa, for them to be able to come to us and say, hey, this is a social failure in your society that's expressing itself on our platform, and what are you doing about that? So I think there are accountabilities that go both ways, and it's really important to reflect those in the way that we work.
Janine, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my area it's possibly a bit simpler because you're looking at money flows, and they're traceable, they're in many cases freezable, and things can, they're enforceable by code and program. And so it's like, if you can agree, and that's probably the challenge, if you can agree, the enforcement side, when it comes down to the private sector, is actually quite straightforward. I'll leave the international agreements to the trade negotiators.
Great, thanks. Look, we've got 1 more minute, so I'd like the 20-second takeaway from each of you. David, you go first.
Gosh, I've learned a lot about crypto today, so that's exciting.
I've learned a lot about international affairs.
Yeah. No, just really inspiring to have this conversation, to have such interesting, diverse set of questions from across the room, and thanks everyone who contributed.
Great. And Janine?
Yeah, and I mean, I think, as you probably tell, I'm a bit of an optimist, and I'm, very excited about the future. And there is definitely big challenges, like the AI stuff. I think we can't understate, and there's been some really good questions around the challenges in that area, and also around how we manage this as an international community. But it's very great, like David said, to see the minds, see the people who are in the room, and people who are turning their attention to this. So I'm hopeful.
Very good. Now, I have it on good authority that there are blocks of chocolate for speakers and also for moderators who finish on time. So we've got 32 seconds left. I think we'll just call it a day there and fill up the remaining time with a warm round of applause for our fantastic panel.